largest Ford dealership.
My playtex cross your heart, Rob.
Oh, how quaint.
Our universes only start from the inside of our head and go out in all different directions in any direction till infinity.
You have a strange language, little one.
Me?
Prepare to get blown by this movie.
Quick, suck it before the venom reaches my heart.
So normally we start these videos out with you summarizing the plot, and I'm kind of curious how you're going to go about with this one.
Okay, so it starts off with a gentleman at a bridge ceremony. He's about to cut the ribbon, and you have the Monkees, the band. If you haven't heard of them, check them out. Jeez, all right, give me one more time.
All right.
I gotta try this like on the fly. Okay, so essentially what you have here is the Monkees, and they're going from scene to scene, different clip to clip. You got them as dandruff, you got them as cowboys, you got them as war soldier dudes.
Day in and day out. Excuse me, sir.
And then, hear me out. Now the Monkees in this film go from scene to scene and plot to plot, and every scene is just a little bit different, leaving the Monkees just as confused as the audience. And the Monkees kind of have to deal with this, and they're not quite sure what's going on, and they're getting more and more frustrated until the film finally finishes with them all getting a little wet.
Yep.
That's good, right?
That's good.
That's good.
That was a good summary. Well done.
Thank you. I can't do it again. Don't ask me.
I think you did a pretty good job. It is very difficult to explain this to anybody, and it's hard to even jump into this film without knowing about the Monkees. Like, you need to know some of the lore. Originally in the TV show, the actors that played the Monkees had very little to do with the actual music. It was produced by other people. It was written by different musicians.
It was played by other musicians.
Exactly. They were essentially just puppets, faced for the TV show. But as they gained popularity and started learning how to play their instruments better, they really wanted to have more of a hand in it.
There's this famous story where Mike Nesmith is so frustrated by this that he looks at his manager and punches a wall and says, "That could have been your face." And you definitely get that vibe, at least from him during this film. He's frustrated by everything that's going on. He's the only character who gets really angry.
He's the most snarky of the group.
And I'll tell you something else, too. The same thing goes for Christmas.
Even though this movie is essentially a satire on the Monkees' career, they all stay in character to their TV show characters.
Right. If Mike Nesmith, he's the cool, level-headed character. You have Davy Jones, he's the romantic. You have Peter Tork, who's essentially the George Harrison of the group, very introspective and quiet. And then you have Mickey, and he's the wild card.
And they had this whole scene where they were questioning their identities, like, who is the dummy?
You're the dummy.
I'm the dummy?
You're the dummy.
I'm not the dummy.
I'm the dummy, Mickey. I'm always the dummy.
You're right, Pete. You're always a dummy. I forgot.
Now, the Monkees weren't the only famous people to be in this film. You have Jack Nicholson and Frank Zappa, but the director I hadn't really heard of until watching this.
Bob Rafelson, he actually directed a lot of the Monkees TV show. He met Jack Nicholson at a film society and got Jack Nicholson to help him write the script. Now, Jack Nicholson had no idea who the Monkees were.
Really?
No, but Jack Nicholson's like, okay, I think I know where you're going with this. This has to play out like an acid trip.
It definitely
It
does.
definitely does. And when they were writing the script, they were actually doing a lot of drugs. And at one point, Bob Rafelson was getting like so lost in his head that Jack Nicholson had to ask him, like, "What? Are you okay?" Bob Rafelson said,
"I was trying to imagine the darkest thing on the planet." And he said, "Yeah, well, what would that be?" I said, "That would be Victor Mature's hair."
So that's where we get the commercial scene where the Monkees end up being dandruff and hair. And it's this old classic actor who's been in like a lot of biblical movies.
And that's the darkest thing.
And that's the darkest thing he could think of.
Every scene is worth watching on its own. It's very funny. There's a lot going on.
There's great comedic timing in this with the editing and just the pacing. One of my favorite scenes was the Coca-Cola scene.
I love that scene. It's basically, okay, so you have a guy stuck in a desert and he's like struggling, like, "Oh, I'm so thirsty, man. I gotta get some water." and he finds this Coca-Cola machine for no reason out in the middle of a desert, but it's empty.
Things go better with Coca-Cola. Things go better with Coke.
This really goes all over the place. They even cut in things from other movies. There's a scene from, I believe it's either The Black Cat or The Raven. I always get those two movies confused. But it's just like this hilarious little quote from Bela Lugosi.
Sounds like a lot of supernatural baloney to me.
Supernatural, perhaps. Baloney, perhaps not.
The editing in this film is really something to look forward to. They do such a great job. There's the one scene with Davy Jones, and he's like, where's he going? It was a man. And he has a white suit and a black tie and a black background, and they cut it in with another choreographed dance that he also performed
on a completely different set. So he had to do this dance over and over again to get it timed right. And the editing must have been a nightmare, especially with hand cutting the film, because if you're off by one frame, the audio isn't gonna sync up, but it's so well done, it gives you a little bit of epilepsy, but it's a trip to watch.
It's really good.
A big reason why this film didn't do well is because it's very edgy, and their base audience was children.
If it isn't God's gift to the 8-year-olds.
But this was not meant for children. It shows a lot of topical things from the 60s, like the Vietnam War. It shows graphic images from it.
Extremely graphic.
But it's almost like dark humor. It makes fun of suicide.
Yeah, you have the one lady who's on top of a building, and she's wearing a bikini because it's the 60s. And you have the Monkees placing bets on whether or not she's gonna jump off and kill herself.
I say she won't.
Oh, sure she will. $10 says she will.
$10, huh?
Gonna do it!
Hey, Mike, listen, man, I got
Peter, don't be rude.
It did not do well in theaters for a number of reasons.
Well, one of those reasons actually was the advertising. They didn't plan out the advertising very well. They were just as experimental with the advertising as they were with the movie itself. Mm-hmm. So the advertisements didn't even really show that it was a Monkees film. It was just an image of a random guy's head. So Bob Rafelson said that during the opening, there was about 15 people in the theater, a good portion of which was family members.
Ouch.
And pretty much all the rest of them wanted their money back. It was that bad.
There's a reoccurring theme in this film, which is that the Monkees are stuck in this black steel box. That's one of the few things I didn't really grasp.
Mickey was asked about this at one point in an interview, and he said it was a metaphor for whenever they were on tour, they were always in a room, whether it be the hotel room or backstage, or even a fake amplifier on stage. They always felt like they were pushed around from box to box. I also heard this theory that during the TV show, there was what they called a meat locker, and they were so rambunctious and noisy that they would be put in this meat locker whenever they weren't on stage, so they wouldn't ruin a take. But they also use this to, take a few hits between each scene.
Oh, of course.
Oh, this is not one of your standard brands.
Oh, an El Zumo.
Imagine having to smoke that whole thing.
I wouldn't say that this movie is at all influential to other films, but it does remind me a lot of modern internet media, where it's very ADD.
All over the place.
And just a lot of sensory overload, where it's just like visual scene after visual comedy skit.
Bam, 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 bam. You know what I'm saying, brother?
It's a bunch of craziness.
And it's pretty fun to watch, but at the same time, you feel a little bit of fatigue. When you're done with the film, you're like, ooh, all right, let's do something else. Speaking of which, let's try the beer. We have Head Charge DIPA by Otter Creek. Let's give it a shot.
Got a little excited there.
Much like the film, this definitely has a nice head to it.
Charles.
Cheers.
Charles.
Cheers. I smell grapefruit.
I don't get too much of an aroma, but it's extremely bitter tasting, like a resiny bitterness.
Ooh, that is potent.
It's strong. It's a very strong beer.
That is incredibly bitter. Okay, so much like the film, this has a lot going on in it.
Yeah.
If you don't like bitter beers, you might want to stay away from this. If that's your thing, give it a shot. It's not a bad flavor.
I think it's pretty good.
It's pretty good, but it's pretty strong. Also at 8%, you might want to take it a little easy if you're going to be chugging beers.
I'd say having a few of these during the movie would be a great time.
Dandruff, we know we can be rough, but not if you get tough.
Settle down. Very good. Turn around a little bit, will you?
Roll tough, tough. We lose forever, we lose forever. Tough, remove dandruff. Get tough.
Monkees is the craziest people.